I was still high. I was high. I ended up being high for the next 5 days. And this was my first time taking edibles. So I didn't know, the experience, how it would go. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what happened to me. I didn't know who I was, but it was like there was no off button. I was completely just gone.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Jack Regas from Chicago, Illinois. Jack is 28 years old. In 2021, he developed Depersonalization Derealization Disorder, triggered by a bad experience on edibles. Some of the symptoms he experienced were the feelings of having a constant third-person point of view, detachment from reality, and distortions in time. It was a terrifying experience. Unfortunately, Jack has since made a complete recovery. As he wrote to me in a recent email, quote, "I'd like to share my depersonalization derealization story to promote a sense of community for those who are going through such a challenging gauntlet," end quote. And Jack is with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from depersonalization disorder. Jack, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Sean. I can't believe I'm here. I've been watching your channel for so long, and I contemplated coming on, and I'm finally here. So it's great to be here.
Well, I'm glad you did. You're very, very welcome to the channel. Jack, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm a writer. I write poetry, self-help, spiritual books, and film scripts. I self-published 2 poetry books about my experience with, PTSD. I love photography, painting, movies, and lifting weights. I would like to study filmmaking in the future. And I just finished a huge book right now, so I'm finally taking some time off right now.
That is fantastic. Sounds like you've got a lot of different interests. That's wonderful.
Yes.
Jack, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah. My experience started winter 2021. I had I had the stress of online classes like many others in the time of the lockdowns. And my dog, my English bulldog of 11 years, he passed away. And I wanted to de-stress, right? And so I started hypnosis with binaural beats, ASMR, stuff to calm you down, to just make you forget about things, right? And it was helpful for about a month. And then it just wasn't doing it. I was still grieving. It wasn't getting better. And I got tired of the whole grieving process because I've been through it so many times. And so I looked to marijuana. It was just legalized in Chicago. And I felt a little bit of a safety net that it was legalized because I don't know, I thought there was less risk of it being laced with some type of drug like fentanyl, and so I could get it from a store, and that's what I did. I got it from a store. I got some joints. I smoked for a month. The average amount of THC in each joint was about 34, and so I was mixing hypnosis and weed. Pot, for about a month following that, and I was, everything was all right. And my first 420 was approaching, and I was starting to get, starting to enjoy the whole high life culture, and I wanted to go big, and I got some edibles, and so on 420, I wanted to try edibles, and I was so I had some beers, I smoked some weed, and now the night was getting late, and I wanted to try some edibles. I contemplated taking 8 at the time, so instead I took 2, and I put a hypnosis video on. The video was about 50 minutes, and in about 15 minutes in the hypnosis session, after taking the edibles and everything, I passed out. And I woke up sometime after it was over. So I was about unconscious for about 35 minutes, something like that. And when I woke up, it was like I was cut down the middle with electricity. My whole left side of my body was having these uncontrollable spasms. And it was like also my left side of my body was completely numb. At that moment, I was completely gone. I started to panic. I had this immense fear that something was going to happen to me, like I was going to die. I couldn't feel my heartbeat. And when I also with the hypnosis video, there was it had this heartbeat in it, and there were spirals in the video, and I got used to the heartbeat of the video, of the hypnosis video. And so when I passed out and when I woke up and there was no more, and the video was over, the heartbeat was over of the video, completely panicked, like I didn't have a heart anymore. So I panicked. I was like, something's happening to me. I went to my kitchen. I grabbed some peppercorn, a lemon, and some water, because I read what to do if you get too high. And so then I grabbed those items. I went outside and I was, taking peppercorn, eating lemon, trying to wear off this high, because that was the only logical thing that made me intoxicated, the edibles. I could think that far ahead. And I couldn't, when I made it to the backyard at nighttime and I was by myself, I couldn't control. I was having these moments, these loss of consciousness, and I would be in one area of the yard, and I would get this immense pleasure, and then I would lose consciousness, and I would wake up on the ground somewhere else in the yard. I later found out that, a couple years later, that I was nodding out from just this overstimulation of my from the drugs on my nervous system. I felt so out of it. It was like my hands were the size of ants, and they were miles away, and I was in this dark tunnel looking down. I felt like I was in slow motion. Like I would have a thought. I would have a thought about moving my left arm, and it would happen 30 seconds later. So I was completely just out of it. I managed to go back to the house, ask somebody to call 911. I jumped this fence head first, almost broke my neck. And I waited for the ambulance to come, but I was still nodding out, right? And I would find myself down the street. I live right next to a highway overpass. And I found myself waking up down the street, and I was thinking that at this point, my mind's it's all shaky, right? It's not stable, and a part of me was thinking that I was in a dream. And so, what do you do in a dream that you're not enjoying? You do these things that will wake you up. From past experience of dreaming, if you're having a nightmare, you jump out of a window or something like that. And I found myself down the street, and I was like, oh. And then it got really scary, and I somehow managed to come back to my front stairs and wait for the ambulance to come. And it did. They picked me up. They observed me. They let me go in the morning. I told them I was all right, but I wasn't. I was still high. I was high. I ended up being high for the next 5 days. And this was my first time taking edibles. So I didn't know, the experience, how it would go, but it was like there was no off button. I was completely just gone. I couldn't feel gravity until the third day. Before that, each step was like I would fall into an abyss, into a sky. And the remainder of that high for those 5 days, it had a baseline of warmth and relaxation. And about 2 times throughout each day, between 2 p.m. and 11 p.m. at night, I would have this intense pleasure. And my system, it didn't have enough tolerance for the edibles, I suppose. And also the hypnosis, it was detrimental for me. Each edible, it was 10 milligrams, okay? And I'm mistaken. You know, I was out on that night. I'm usually good at math, but I mistaken the amount of milligrams for THC. So I thought, oh, it's 20 THC for both edibles. And I've smoked 34 THC in a joint, and I thought it wouldn't be a problem, but I misunderstood that when it was really 10 milligrams per edible. And yeah, that's my experience, my traumatic inciting incident that led me to DP and derealization.
So what happened after that? So you said it took you five days to start to feel back to normal. And what was that process like?
I was just trying to be cool. I was like numb for those 5 days while still feeling this ecstasy. I was numb for it, and I was just trying to stay cool in those 5 days, because I never experienced anything like that before. It was very challenging on my mind.
And so was it soon after that then, Jack, that you started to experience the feelings of depersonalization and derealization? How did those come about?
Well, after the incident, you know, I'm sort of like a macho man, because I didn't like how afraid I felt. About a week later, I smoked a joint because I didn't like that fear. So I smoked a joint in the backyard. One more time, I was waiting for that fear to come. It didn't come. And so what followed next was I would turn my head right to the right. And when I would turn it back, all of a sudden a week passed. And then I turned it to the left again. And when I turned it back, another week passed. And all of a sudden 2 weeks went by, and I did not know how I got there.
It's something that I hear happening with people from time to time, and something that I have actually experienced as well, is that, you know, when you eat, especially if you're just used to smoking weed and getting the immediacy of it, of the effect, and then with edibles, you know, that it can take quite a long time for them to take effect, depending on a couple of different factors, like the speed of your metabolism, especially if you've eaten something. If you've had dinner and you eat the edible, the edible can take a long while to process, and it can be a frightening thing to go to sleep or have a nap and just think, well, it's not taking effect, and then an hour or two later, or even a couple of hours later, it starts hitting you really, really hard. It's certainly a scary experience. So were you what was your life like at this point? Were you socializing, or were you working, or what was happening?
I ended up being able to finish my semester, and right after that I graduated. So I had some time off, and I would just be at home, just relaxing, trying to chill. And I was isolated after this for a while.
And at what point did the feelings of depersonalization and derealization appear, Jack? Was it soon after that?
Yes, it was soon after. It was right after. I tried to get assurance that I was better by smoking that joint right after, but I would say right after after I was high for 5 days, it all started there. I had this. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what happened to me. I didn't know who I was. I had this pressure on my jaw, on my head, and I couldn't open my mouth. I was drooling for the 3 months that followed that. So May, June and July, I was completely messed up severely.
Can you tell us more about the DPDR symptoms you experienced in that time, Jack?
Yeah, I felt like I wasn't real. Like, there was this, in the long run, there was this dome of sterilization around me. Um, I felt off balance, like I was on a rocking boat, like I was a floating head. Um, I felt like I couldn't wake up, and there were these time jumps, these distortions in time, where I would I would go for a walk, and then I would, whoa, how'd I get here? Stuff like that, over and over again happening. Um, I had this weight on me that was paralyzing. I couldn't move. Like my body was trying to just rest, but it was just this horrible fatigue. Um, I couldn't feel anything. I couldn't feel anything for May, June, July, until the end of August. I remember being able to feel with my hands again, to pick up a water bottle or any object, and how that was insane, because I was so cut down the middle still.
And were you speaking to any doctors or therapists at this time, Jack?
I went to speak to a therapist around October, and she told me some things about hyperarousal. But for about a month and a half, I was with her, but I soon left because she recommended that I smoke weed again. That maybe it was just bad advice, and I didn't want to go down that road again. I was tired of all of that.
At what point, Jack, did you find out that it was called depersonalization?
I found out that it was called depersonalization in July. I was telling my mother how I didn't feel like anything was real, that I couldn't understand how she was there. And she went searching online. She found your videos and she showed them to me. And as soon as you listed off these symptoms, it finally felt like there was hope, that I understood what was going on with me. Because I felt so alone in the dark for those first 3 initial months.
So when you spoke to your doctor or your therapist, Jack, did you mention the words depersonalization to them?
Yes, I did. I mentioned it to my therapist, and she didn't. She just said it was just trauma related, which I believe depersonalization is born from trauma, but it was just that she didn't make too much of an emphasis on it. I went to my my PCP, and all she did was tell me to do crossword puzzles. And I ended up going to a neurologist because I thought I had a stroke, right? Because all these horrible symptoms that I'm experiencing, and I got an MRI, and they said everything was all right with my head.
It can often be a frustrating experience to it should feel like a relief to be told everything's fine, but when you've been told everything's fine, but you feel the opposite, you feel anything but that, it can be frustrating. So were you doing, I know you said your mother had done some research on your behalf, but were you doing research online as well? Were you looking on forums or anything like that? What was that like?
Yeah, I went on forums, and I saw these personal stories, and how terrifying their stories were. But I understood some of the symptoms I was sharing with them, and once I knew it was depersonalization, I was like, I had to buckle myself in, right? But at the same time, the symptoms, they were chewing away at me. They were just taking every bit of energy out of me. But I did find some comfort in forums and researching. But I knew that I knew that I had to go my own way. I had to be independent in my recovery.
Throughout the whole experience, Jack, what was your lowest point? Is there a moment or a time that still sticks with you?
My lowest point was I would hurt myself to wake myself up. The pain that I would, self-inflict, that would be the only comfort, because, I'm awake. I'm here. I'm awake. I finally feel something. I feel some little inkling of reality, whether it be pain. That was my lowest point. And I know that I couldn't keep doing that. Right. So it was a quick thing and it ended.
How did your recovery start, Jack?
Well, that December, after I went to the neurologist and everything was fine, I put my noise canceling headphones on again, right? And those are the ones that I wore when I was watching the hypnosis session. And I put them on again. I went for a walk, and something happened, right? My body and my mind reacted the wrong way to it, because it was a flashback to waking up to this horrible sound of silence being high. I went back there, and for 5 days in December, over the span of a week, I had 5 panic attacks, and it was then I couldn't. I was just floored by all of them. I didn't know what to do, right? And so then I didn't want to run from the problem, but also I never had panic attacks before in my life. And I was just having them one after another during this week. And I decided, all right, I can't run from it. I got to go. And I had to stick my foot into the ground and say, part of my healing is facing the problem, right? Speaking truth at it. When I would speak truth at what seemed like to be an oncoming panic attack, it would go away. And I would get loud. And so after that horrible experience of panic attacks and finding some confidence that I still had control, I heard this word processing. And when I started to process, I started to be able to think more clearly and understand that what was making me be complicit in my derealization and depersonalization was not taking responsibility for that thing in the corner of the room, which was fear. Fear would drive all of it up to the max. Once I found out the layer of fear, I had some leeway. I had some room to be able to move a little more. So I started to work out again. I started to lift weights, and I started to, just speak the truth more at the reality around me, even though I still wasn't feeling it, because there were things there were items in reality that were challenging all the time. Like, I have a coffee table to my left, and it would challenge me all the time. I couldn't just sit there and just accept it. Everything was challenging me. Everything was fronting on me, and that was another symptom. But I had to get used to that. I had to sit there with it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it. Feeling challenged by everything. When you're on high alert and your body and brain are on the lookout for danger, everything that you lay your eyes on can feel like it is a threat, even though consciously you know that it's not a threat, it's an inanimate object, but it always feels like it becomes front and center in your attention. It can feel like a very scary experience. Jack, can you tell us more about what it felt like then to get out of that and to get back to normal? When you started to get back to your normal day-to-day life, and even, for example, the way that feeling of confrontation by things. How did it feel when those feelings started to subside?
It started to feel good to be able to start to flip that coin. For the majority of my time with derealization, depersonalization, darkness was nice to me. I liked darkness. I felt safe in the darkness because when it was light out, I would have to deal with all these things. I would have to notice everything. So it felt good to be able to flip that coin, to feel the mind just inch by inch starting to wake up. I had this horrible taste of bitterness just all around me in depersonalization. But that January that followed my panic attacks, I felt like I got I got another thing back in my toolbox of recovery. I got comfortability with my hearing again. I was able to sit with my headphones on and be able to last with it. I would have to understand what the triggers were of my trauma that were keeping me in depersonalization and chip them apart piece by piece. Each day was my processing that I did. And so I got my hearing back, I would say, as it used to be in January. And then in March, with my exercising, with my lifting weights, pumping that blood, I was finally able to settle a little more down and feel my heartbeat again, my racing heart. And I got my heartbeat again in March.
Isn't it? That's great to hear. And isn't it so interesting how, we get comfort back with your hearing and your vision, as you're saying. And what that feels like is, well, I'm not afraid to listen to my music anymore, or I don't feel as scared to be outside or to be in, daylight. And essentially all that is that your anxiety levels are dropping. And so the hypersensitivity that comes with fight or flight response or heightened anxiety, which means that your eyes and ears are on high alert for danger, starts to reduce. And it's a very, it's a great relief. It's a lovely relieving experience when you actually can get back to those normal things. Jack, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
It was very helpful because it went step by step. That basically, went at your own pace and telling you that you're not going crazy, you're not alone, and somehow, in this crazy world, there's actually a community that is experienced with this, and if you stay strong, you're going to be okay. So that was very nice.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad it was so helpful, and I loved how you phrased it in your email when you said, I'd like to be able to help people who are running this gauntlet, because that's absolutely what it feels like at the start. It just feels like this massive obstacle course. And I think that the more information people have about it, the easier it is to navigate that and to not get lost in it for any longer than you need to be,
Mm-hmm.
So Jack, now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yes, it is. It takes some time, right? But I would say that you have to treat what you are as a human being. Like, you have to see yourself as an observatory, right? An observatory looks to the stars. And when you're going through depersonalization, derealization, the observatory is close. But as you keep going and you keep staying the course, the observatory is starting to rise up, the shutters are opening, and you'll be able to look into the stars again. And you'll be yourself again.
That's a nice analogy. And another one I always think of is there's this idea in, I think that it's a Japanese saying, and it compares time to moving up a hill. So it says that, like, if feel like you're in danger, you're in difficulty, it feels like you're in a forest. But as time passes by, you move up the hill. So initially you can only see the trees around you. You can only see the perceived danger around you. And as time goes by, you move up the hill, and the more distance you get on the hill, the more you can look down at that situation, and you can look at it from a practical point of view. You can see it from an overview,
Right.
which is just another way of thinking about the symptoms of anxiety in DPDR, which is that when you're going through them, you think, oh God, well, my vision has been damaged, my memory is damaged, I've fried my brain with drugs, all these different catastrophic interpretations. And then as time goes by and you get some just distance on it, you look back at it from a practical point of view and you say, okay, that's why that happened. That's why I thought that was happening. That's why I had this symptom and that symptom and that symptom. But that's the beauty of patience and discipline, is that you do get past that and you can look at it, and then it goes from being a terrifying experience to something that strengthens you and gives you a great sense of perspective, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
You build callous. You build callous on yourself. You know, I would say that there was this one last piece of the puzzle that I need to solve. That August, after that, I went back to the hypnosis video. I went into the dark. I put my headphones on, and I went back to the hypnosis session. When I was intoxicated on that 420, I didn't leave the hypnosis session. A part of me did it. A part of me was stuck, because anybody knows that when you do hypnosis, it's only as powerful as the power you give it. And so I gave it power on that initial night, but I didn't take it back. And so I had to go revisit that trauma. Everything felt so natural, so normal again. But there was still some area where I still had to grow. I could see that part of a telltale sign of my recovery was I was getting back to the fluidness of time of my movement. No longer was I like, I thought today was Monday when it was already Sunday the following week.
There's going to be people watching this video who may be going through a very similar experience that you went through. They may be going through what you experienced at the very beginning of what you went through with DPDR. If you have any advice for those people, what would it be? What advice would you have for yourself if you could speak to yourself back when this first happened?
Don't be afraid, because having fear makes you a complicit participant of it. Don't be afraid. Okay, you're not going crazy. Everything's going to be all right. You're going to be stronger from this. Okay, you got to have the mentality of, this will not break me. Others have gone through this. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to be better for this. If this doesn't destroy me, which it won't, nothing will. Okay, you got to preserve your mind. You got to have that mental fortitude, and you got to have the smarts to have the self-reliance to know what works for you, what doesn't. What you have to get out of your life, what you have to get rid of, and what you have to preserve to keep that sanity. Even though you feel like you're going crazy, you have to preserve any inkling that keeps you sane. You know, take time to go and nourish yourself with these things that serve your nervous system, you know.
Jack, it's been so lovely to speak with you today. Thank you for taking the time to appear on the channel. I know there's going to be people watching this who find your story extremely helpful and inspirational. It's been a pleasure to chat to you, and thank you so much.
It was great. It was a great show. Opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Take care, Jack. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.